Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us live on today's edition of Health Tech Thursday. Data and Diagnostics. I know the title says digital, but it's actually data. This is presented by the CSE and CASCOR. We're pleased to have 4 companies and 1 guest moderator today. Dr. Christopher Pettengell, Medical Director at Pentavere. Dr. Thomas Sawyer, Chief Operating Officer of Cognetivity Neurosciences Limited, proudly listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange under symbol CGN. A little promo there. Richie Bavasso, CEO of NQ Medical Inc. And Rohit Joshi, CEO of Brightsquid. Our guest moderator is Dennis Giokas, Principal at Theoria Health Innovations Inc. and former CTO of Canada Health Infoway. This represents today's lineup. Our objective in running Health Tech Thursday is twofold. First is to help digital health technology companies gain visibility and traction on an accessible platform. The second is to help capital markets players and investors sort through the myriad of technology companies in this space by introducing interesting companies, whether they're focusing on the technology or if it will have commercial traction, and why, and also providing new knowledge of what is happening in innovation. As for you attendees, we do ask that you share your ideas and feedback with our presenters, leads, possible funding opportunities, after due diligence, referral of someone with unique applicable expertise, and maybe even a potential strategic relationship are all encouraged. You can find their contact information in the chat board. With respect, we might refrain from giving management advice unless we are truly experts in the company's particular field. And don't treat our presenting companies as marketing targets for your services. Some housekeeping matters. You will note a red reconnect tab at the top of your screen. If you lose audio, just click it and you'll be reconnected. In the event that there are technical problems, will you hit the restart? In that case, there's no action required. The system will automatically reconnect everyone. We aim to run at 45 minutes to an hour. Like I said, usually we have 3 companies, but today we have 4. So jam-packed lineup, really excited about that. Regarding the chat board, it may be utilized to ask serious questions. Be clear as to whom your question is being addressed. We also have a short disclaimer, which will be posted in the chat board. I'm not going to bother read that, but you can refer to it at your leisure. Each company will have 6 minutes to do a presentation with their PowerPoint. When they see my face, or when you see my face, that means the company has 15 seconds to wrap up. After all the companies have presented, we'll move to the Q&A with Dennis Giokas as your question moderator. Normally, I'm joined by a co-host, Jason Boboikis, but due to technology, he is unable to join us. Simply, we didn't have enough slots, but I'm going to read a blurb from CASCOR. He's the founder and principal of CASCOR, a boutique merchant bank that partners with entrepreneurs and businesses to accelerate growth. They take an investor-first approach, meaning that not only do they advise as if it was their own business, but they also invest right alongside management. Everything they do is focused on maximizing shareholder value. CASCOR partners with a small handful of entrepreneurs and companies to accelerate growth and by applying their access to capital and management expertise. So, first off, I would like to introduce Dr. Christopher Pettengell. I'm going to read his bio very briefly. Chris is a surgeon and spent over 10 years treating patients and implementing systems to improve clinical efficiency. After completing his MD at Oxford University, Chris trained as a general surgeon at Imperial College in London. Chris was so impressed with the work Pentavere was doing, he moved his family to Canada to be Pentavere's chief medical officer. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Thank you.
I'm going to get your presentation up in just a moment. All right.
Thank you. And thank you to the CSE for inviting me to talk to you for a couple of minutes this afternoon. As we just heard, I'm the Chief Medical Officer here at Pentavere, and we're a health tech company that uses AI to improve patient outcomes. It's as simple and as lofty as that. I'm not an engineer though, so I'm not going to spend or try and spend the next 6 minutes explaining to you what AI is and how our particular AI works. When I spoke to the team last week about what they were expecting from this talk, the message I got was really to share with the community what's going on in the industry. And so I think to do that, I want to share with you what's going on in healthcare and at ground level. And the reason for this is obviously, one, I'm a doctor, as we just heard, but two, I think understanding why we do what we do is as important as understanding what we do. So I just mentioned that I'm a surgeon. I've trained in the UK, and it was on kind of moving into practice and starting to see patients that I got involved in real world outcomes, real world data. And this isn't an academic exercise. It was never an academic exercise for me and for many of my colleagues. This is about real people, real patients. We base so many of our decisions on clinical trials, on sanitized patients, the 50-year-old white male that makes it into all of our clinical trials. But these don't address the real issues of the complex, varying patients that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. And, as a surgeon, as a clinician in general, we need to make real life, life and death decisions for all of these patients. What treatments to give them, what treatments certain patients will respond to that others might. And this is a real problem that affects all of us, clinicians and, of course, patients. And the problem is that despite drowning in data, we still don't have, or we still can't get that critical info we need to the right people to answer these questions. As a practicing clinician, I started to look around, but nothing I could find, no company, no academic method, no kind of new methodology could solve the specific problem that to aggregate this data, to make sense of the data for me and my colleagues to do better, required going through thousands of pages of text. And doing that is incredibly time consuming, it's incredibly expensive, and so very often it just doesn't get done. And it was at this point I came across Pentavere, and Pentavere's first AI application was built to solve this specific problem. I should say, I forget the global audience, but I should say that Pentavere is based in Toronto, Canada, so it wasn't a local company for me, and at the time they were based at kind of an academic research institute here called St. Michael's Hospital, a world-class institute, sure. And I came across them, and I really reached out to find out were their claims real. And I think, in all honesty, I didn't believe them at the time. I was engaging with Google DeepMind. So how was it that a small company from Toronto was solving this particular problem? But as we just read in my bio, when I saw what they did, when I saw what they were doing, what they were capable of, it really prompted me to leave clinical practice, pack up my bags, move across the pond, and I'm now based here full time as Pentavere's chief medical officer. And the really fantastic thing about this for me is that it enables me to work with some of the best institutions in the world, some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, because for both of those groups, what they're relying on is high quality data. And when you ask them now, it's AI like this is how they're now getting at it. And these aren't just theoretical kind of academic applications, but this is real data into the hands of people that really need it. I think when I first made this decision to pack up and leave clinical practice, my friends, my colleagues, my family certainly, no one really understood. I got a lot of pushback. They didn't get it. They didn't understand the power or the potential opportunity here of AI to really move healthcare forward. But I put these quotes up just to demonstrate some of the kind of the range and the scope and scale of the work we're doing with industry leaders and clinicians who, I have to confess, far smarter than me. This really validates my decision to move into, to move outside of clinical practice, because it shares, and they're constantly sharing with me the impact, the real world impact that these projects are having on their practice and on patients' lives. With the last kind of couple of minutes I have available to me, I just want to pause and reflect on, I think, where we are in healthcare and AI in general. I think we'd all be forgiven for thinking, given what is shared with us, given the media, that actually we're way along this kind of growth curve in AI healthcare. And I think, sure, we probably are. I don't know, but I hear that we probably are in other industries. The co-founder of the company spent 20 years architecting solutions for the financial service sector, and he tells me that now, what was impressive then is even more so, and that AI is being used to lock in trades, millions of times, and to grow wealth and revenue for financial services organizations. But this is not the case in healthcare. Sure, we can optimize, ad buys in social media, but optimizing cancer care, even within a single institution, is currently beyond the realm of what we're achieving right now. But I think it's that exact opportunity that excites us at Pentavere, and keeps us building and generating more and more value for our clients and our customers in the projects we're doing. Every day we're getting feedback on the hundreds of applications and growing the scale of what we're doing with these clinicians, with these institutions. And I'm sure, in conversations with them, we're hearing about potentially thousands of applications of AI within healthcare. Sure, we're at its infancy, but it's that opportunity I think so critical now, because we're at this intersect between where data is becoming available and capabilities that have been demonstrated elsewhere can be used and can generate new applications within healthcare. And I think my final point there is that every application within using AI in healthcare is an opportunity to improve healthcare and save lives. That's why I do what I do. That's why we do what we do at Pentavere. And I'd say thank you, pause there, and excited for the discussions later.
Well, thank you so much. It is much appreciated. And again, I would like to encourage our audience, if you have questions, please submit them into the chat board. If you would like to follow up with these companies, we encourage you to go to their website and take a look. Next up, we have Cognetivity, and Thomas Sawyer is the Chief Operating Officer of Cognetivity and has 20 years of experience in entrepreneurship, management, consulting, and private equity investment in sectors including medical technology, biotechnology, IT, and data science, logistics, and natural resources in Europe, North America, and Africa, where he has held CEO, CTO, CFO, COO, I think he's had all of the C's, and director roles. His skill set covers management, raising capital, technology, exploration, corporate structure, and strategic development. Thomas holds an executive MBA from the University of Cambridge and a PhD from the University of Glasgow.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So I'd like to speak to you about our company, Cognitivity Neurosciences, and our approach to solving a massive problem in healthcare. The company was originally a spin-out from the University of Cambridge in the UK, and we're focused in helping in an area described by the World Health Organization as the biggest healthcare challenge of the 21st century. I'm sure that I don't have to go into too much detail, but suffice to say that dementia has become a leading cause of death around the world. And shockingly, 1 in 2 people die without a formal diagnosis, rising to 9 in 10 in developing countries. So why does this matter? Well, it matters a great deal. Early diagnosis leads to better patient outcomes, but there is also a massive financial imperative to solving the issue of early detection, with a recent Alzheimer's Association report putting the value of savings to the US healthcare system for early diagnosis of current sufferers at up to $7.9 trillion. But still the problem remains. So why is this? Well, existing available methods for detection are riddled with problems. These are typically pen and paper tests requiring expert supervision by a clinician and tend to take around 30 minutes and suffer from a number of issues, including lack of precision. These tests are not sensitive and have crude cutoffs, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. There are practical issues. These require expensive clinician time and are difficult to administer remotely. And over and above this, current standard of care tests suffer from biases caused by reliance on a single language. If it's not your first language, you don't score as well. Heavy education bias, and a significant learning effect. So what is the answer? Well, we believe the answer is to take a different approach. To use a computer analogy, instead of measuring the hard drive by asking memory-related questions, we look at the CPU, measuring speed of information processing. We do this by using a technique we call rapid visual categorization. Subjects are exposed to short-duration images and asked to respond as to whether or not they saw an animal in the image. This slightly unusual request takes advantage of the human brain's strong reaction to animacy and allows us to collect high-quality data, giving an objective measure of the brain's ability to quickly and accurately process complicated information, an objective measure of brain performance. Just jump ahead here 1 second. We can further enhance our predictive ability by using artificial intelligence. But why does AI help in detection? Well, firstly, it's able to greatly improve classification, reducing errors caused by small variations in score that result in misclassification of patients. Small errors can have a big effect. Over and above that, the ability to use multidimensional data to describe a subject's responses allows optimization of cutoff values, reducing errors and allowing greater accuracy in classification. Given this, we're able to train our AI models on a very rich data set, distinguishing between initially 3 main groups. Now, for all these images that you're shown in the test, we have a wealth of information about the mathematical properties of these, and this gives us a very large amount of information to use for training our models. Now, we split our initial categories of patients into healthy, mild cognitive impairment, the really important pre-symptomatic stage of disease, and mild disease, in this case, Alzheimer's disease. In our training data, we use the gold standard of expert clinical diagnosis and can plot the speed and accuracy of response for each of these images. And as you can see in the previous slide and this one, it's quite clear that there are significant differences between each of these. This allows us to develop models of high predictive accuracy. So how does this translate into real-world usage? Well, our primary market is clinical, giving doctors a usable and effective tool that can be used to make sure that patients are identified at the right time when interventions are effective. This will become even more important as new drugs come to the market, which are able to modify the disease. So detection early in order to stop progress is extremely important. At primary healthcare, the test can be used in a similar way to a blood pressure test. That makes it a cheap and meaningful measure that can be part of an annual health check. Primary healthcare physicians don't have the time to administer cognitive assessment, so our test's ability to be given unsupervised or even at home allows at-risk patients to be identified, monitored, and referred to specialists when most appropriate without impacting the doctor's workflow. At a specialist level, the test can be used to do triage, allowing patient prioritization when they enter this stage and to lower the cost of diagnosis. But it can also importantly allow high-resolution monitoring of patients' progress throughout the course of treatment, giving feedback on effectiveness to the clinician. We also believe our technology has a very important role to play in drug discovery. There are currently around 150 late-stage clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease alone, and trials typically cost hundreds of millions of dollars. However, the tools available to measure are the same ones that we criticized earlier. These are not effective at picking up small changes in signal that are required to measure the efficacy of drugs. What is needed is a sensitive, repeatable, objective tool to allow subtle signals to be detected and to allow recruitment of these crucial early-stage patients, which are usable in trials. I'll jump on to the last slide, thank you. So this is our path. We're already currently using the NHS in the UK. We achieved our CE marking for European clinical use last year and expect our FDA approval later next year. We also have a personalized cognition tracker, which allows individuals to measure their cognitive function in the same way you would measure your weight or heart rate, allowing them to take control of their lifestyle and its impact on their cognition. Thanks very much.
And thank you. And again, if you are in our audience, if you have questions, please contribute to the chat board, and we will be moving on to NQ. Richie Bavasso is the CEO and co-founder of NQ Medical Inc., a machine learning computational biomark company leveraging personal devices to manage neuromotor disease. NQ builds powerful AI solutions to support the continuum of neurological health. He is a senior executive consultant, digital health and MedTech Americas for Scottish Development International. Mr. Bavasso is a licensed hospital administrator, having served as VP at 2 health systems in New England. A graduate of Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, he received his MBA in Healthcare Management and Finance from Bryant University. Without further ado.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Sawyer, for setting up the discussion of dementia. We have never met before, but it looks our two presentations are asynchronous. I start with my investor slide. Who are we? Well, we're a machine learning platform that optimizes care for clinicians, patients, and the caregivers in the neurological space, all diseases of motor and cognition. We have a belief that you start with real world evidence, you then get regulatory clearance, then you educate doctors and you get it in the hands of patients, which unlike some of the 500,000 health entertainment apps that are out there, tend to do it in the reverse. Our target market is the billion-plus people who suffer from these various neurological diseases. And, you know, the worried well. If your mom has Alzheimer's, your dad has Parkinson's, you're probably worried about it. And you want to know is it creeping up on you. We have a 4-part revenue model, which I'll share momentarily. We've have revenues from 2019 going to 2021, roughly about $4 million in revenue. And we just completed our second convertible note round. And we're anticipating a Series A in the fourth quarter of next year. So we have a bias, and this bias flies in the face of some people's beliefs. We don't believe in proprietary devices, nor task-based apps. We're a 100% passive data collection tool that works off your personal device. Android, iOS, Windows, phone, laptop, desktop, makes no difference. Makes no difference what language you speak. Makes no difference what your device skills are. Think in terms of brain, finger, device connection. We're generating a brain health score every 90 seconds based on that millisecond your finger is touching the touchscreen or the mechanical keyboard. The data that we've been able to generate over the past 6 years is focused on early detection of disease, providing real-world, unbiased evidence of disease progression. And because we track disease progression, we can show the impact of therapy, whether that's drug, device, or other. One of my advisors, I think, says it best in a statement about digital health in general. Most of the assessment tools in this space are very subjective and very infrequent, and significant decisions are being made on behalf of the patient without the patient even knowing how they're doing. You know, how am I doing today, doc? Oh, you're doing great. No, I want a quantifiable way of measuring how am I doing. How's the drug working that I'm taking that you prescribed for me? Oh, it's working fine. No, I want a quantifiable score that this drug is having an impact in the therapy. And that's what we're bringing to market. This is a result of many years worth of clinical trials with some prestigious organizations, starting fatigue, alcohol inebriation, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and ALS and MS. We have many peer-reviewed publications, and we have two more in progress in the cognitive space. We received breakthrough status from the FDA last November, and we're anticipating our de novo software as a medical device clearance for Parkinson's in the coming year, roughly around the third quarter. This is a device signature. I'll presume most of the people on this call are normal. When we interact with our devices and we're normal, every time we use our device is consistent. So yesterday and today and tomorrow look exactly the same in terms of how we interact with our device. This is a unique device signature. Just like a fingerprint, your device signature is also unique to you. So you can well imagine when disease is introduced, in this case, a Parkinson's patient, de novo, there are variations. There are variations in hold time, flight time, pressure, different functionality of how you interact with your device. And over the course of time, this is the same patient 2 years later, Imagine every 90 seconds we're generating a data point times the hours a day we use our various devices. There's an enormous amount of data being generated to quantify disease progression. Use case is to supplement. We don't want to replace a doctor. We're not a diagnostic tool. We're a remote patient monitoring tool that can track disease progression and impact of therapy. In this particular scenario from our trial, the physician achieved a state of steady using the universal gold standard of UPDRS. However, our data showed that by the end of this trial, this patient was actually getting worse, but the physician had no visibility into that. In terms of drug development, we can predict drug response fairly rapidly. In this particular trial, it took the gold standard 6 months to separate responders from non-responders in the clinical setting of L-DOPA therapy. We were able to achieve that separation in 3 weeks. So this is probably the most interesting slide I'll share with you today. These are all things we look at to separate motor from cognition. Location for hands. I can tell you whether you're left or right-handed. I can tell you which hand is the dominant hand or the non-dominant hand that is being affected by disease. Pauses between words and sentences. Frequency of backspace. Predictive engine. This is all being done without us recognizing anything that you're doing. We don't look at characters. We don't look at numbers. We don't look at websites. We don't look at applications. This is all about how you interact with the machine. Through our data, we've been able to separate disease, a clear separation between MCI and AD, and even within our cohort of Parkinson's patients, we are able to show are there any cognitive deficits present. As you know, Alzheimer's is not a pure cognition disease, and Parkinson's is not a pure motor disease. There's a significant amount of overlap. Our AUCs are good. Our specificity and sensitivity are good. We've been able to document that use of our tool in the clinic and use of our tool at home are statistically the same. So in the wild, without any supervision, we're getting very, very good data. Behind this slide is our cognition sensitivity specificity. But one of the important things we're bringing to market is the ability to track subdomains. So in addition to show that in presence of a cognition or a motor deficit, we can even drill down as to exactly what is driving that particular deficit. So I see I have 15 seconds, so I think I'll just end it on this particular slide right here, our business model. So our business model is very simple. Our revenues are being generated by supporting clinical trials, aligning with pharma and medical device companies as a companion therapeutic. COVID has made us a remote monitoring platform. We have customers in that regard, and we're building this unique data set that we intend to monetize for drug discovery and population health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richie. We appreciate it. And, again, I want to thank our guests and our panelists and our speakers for holding to the time frame. I understand it can be difficult, but we appreciate it. We have a lot of content, and we want to make sure we get all the information. Now, without further ado, Brightsquid, Rohit Joshi, co-founder and CEO. Rohit's career as a senior executive spans more than 25 years with life science and technology companies in the US and Canada. Rohit's legal background has enabled Brightsquid to create and deliver privacy-compliant communication software for thousands of healthcare providers and their patients. With over 2 million secure messages delivered, Brightsquid's health platform is now assisting digital health startups to commercialize. Take it away.
Thanks very much. With 6 minutes, I'm going to jump right into it. Please contact for follow-up at any point. Let me tell you about the basic problem we're trying to solve. Healthcare communication is broken. I know that when we look at health systems across Canada and the US, there's very little discussion between the providers of care and also their patients. And so we've tried to re-envision the health system, starting with the patient, and trying to understand what the patient experience is like between that patient's requirements to communicate and all of the health professionals that they want to communicate with. You know, where we've ended up is the patient is ultimately the consolidator of all of that information. So trying to understand the workflow between the patient and their provider, and between the providers and their other colleagues. It tends to be where we focus. So not surprisingly, we looked at this problem and recognized that it's not a technical problem. It's a problem that has its roots in privacy, security, patient consent, data governance, and on and on and on. And with a legal background, I really felt like I could help solve that problem. And so we built a very simple interface that would enable this sort of communication to occur. We're fortunate that over the past couple of years, that in Ontario now, there's this vision of Ontario Health Teams that really identifies the same problem. If you look at the current state on the left-hand side of the screen, this is the Ministry of Health saying, we've got an issue. We have dotted lines between patients and no communication between any of those constituent care team members. Where the destination is very much where the patient is the center, and that patients receive their care from communications and from a team that's consistent for that patient. What was very interesting for us and inspiring was that in the past few months, St. Joe's in Hamilton has actually released a request for information around secure messaging, trying to look at what are the technologies that will enable this type of discussion, this type of continuity of care for the health team. And we're still waiting results. We were submitted as partners with a couple of different consulting companies. As COVID challenges started to mount here in Alberta, one of the challenges was that our provincial health line, 811, started to back up with hours of wait times if, in fact, you didn't get a busy signal. At the same time, the clinics were being overwhelmed with their patients trying to understand what's the impact of their existing appointments, their existing treatment, as well as trying to find out how do we deal with the consequences of COVID, or do I have it? And so the provincial government reached out and we provided an integration into provincial health portal, which up until last June when we went live, provided health data like lab results, allergies, for the medications that people are on, but didn't allow for a two-way discussion between the patients and their provider. And so they helped us integrate. We helped them communicate with patients. As of December 10th, we have about 106,000 people in Alberta now that are communicating with their physicians through the service. Just a quick snapshot of what's happened to secure messaging in Alberta over a very short period of time since the beginning of 2020. You'll see that in April, the allied health clinics, the psychologists that we work with, dentists, chiropractors, they continue to decline in their activity. But starting in April, we really saw, and that's when many provinces, many locations saw a shutdown of allied health professionals and their practices. We saw a massive increase. Last month, we saw 90,000 messages go between, and these are just between providers, their patients, and between providers and other providers. So we see general practitioners communicating with their specialists. We've captured here 135,000 attachments. And the importance about the attachment is it's something that in some way has a value. It's not something that is simply, I need a new appointment. There is some bit of data that's been transferred. And we're still trying to investigate the best way of providing a value number in terms of how we're doing that. In August, we celebrated 2 million messages sent through our system. It took us 9 years to get to the first million, two years to get to the second million, and based on the numbers now, we'll hit the third million in under a year. We're very excited about that. During this process, and actually before the pandemic, we had recognized that what we've built is a very strong and compliant base for helping other digital startups communicate. What often is seen as an afterthought for a digital health tech company is the secure messaging for all of the providers. So we launched a program which we called Hatch. And we've implemented this to all of our digital health tech startups. We introduced them to the details of security, privacy, and then implement them and give them access to a large marketplace that's already using secure mail. There's quite a bit that's been written about us. Please have a look online, look for Brightsquid, and happy to engage after this. Thanks, Barrington, for the reminder. I could go on for about 60 minutes.
No, this is what you want. You like people that are, passionate and not only passionate, but impassioned with the topic and the subject. So no problem.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Now, at this point, we like to call this the Inquisition. I ask all of our presenters, as well as our guest moderator, Dennis Giokas, who consults primarily to startups, early stage, and SME companies in the digital health space with deep experience in the U.S. and Canadian markets. Areas of focus include product strategy, market positioning, and business terms, channel partnerships, and strategic partnerships. And with that, I turn it over to Dennis.
Turn my mic on. Everyone can hear me okay? Yeah, excellent. Okay, well, thank you everyone for the very interesting perspectives on your companies. I found it a very interesting read prior to today, and even better hearing you speak to it. So based on time, I'd like to kind of settle on a couple themes, given the nature of the audience and the organization. Thank you to the CSE for sponsoring us. Let's talk a little bit about the economic value of data. I remember reading, it's probably a decade ago now, an article in one of the business magazines, and I can't remember which one, but basically the headline were "Data is the new oil." And I'll kind of tip my hand a little bit as to how I feel about it, and then I want to open it up to our presenters to get their thoughts. My first job actually in IT was in the oil industry, and I don't agree with that statement that data is the new oil. With oil, you produce it, you get it out of the ground, produce it, and sell it, and it gets burned and it's gone forever. Data is not like that, including data in healthcare. You get to produce that data, whether it's an interview with a clinician to the patient, whether it's diagnostic data, and that data is used maybe in real time, but the data can be used over time and used over and over and over and over again for many, many, many purposes. So I think there's a lot more economic value to data in the world of healthcare than oil is to our needs in that sector. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is the economic value of data, not only to us as patients, but to payers, to populations, and whatever else you'd like to give us a perspective on.
I'm happy to start. I think we're still in the Paleontothic era of digital and data. Part of the problem, I think, is not so much the machine learning side and the crunching of data, because to your point about oil and data, the algorithms actually make the data smarter and get smarter over time as you feed it. But I think that one of the big problems is healthcare organizations, healthcare stakeholders aren't ready to digest it and use it. I mean, if a patient were to walk in with any one of the data points you heard today, what does the physician do with it? How do governments and payers and even private organizations how do they assimilate it into their practice? I think that's going to be the new learning in the years ahead. I had
was analytics, and there was a lot of pushback on the use of data and analytics by clinicians. And you know what I said to someone? I said, either they're not accountable or they're not curious. So if you're not accountable to what you're doing, maybe you don't need the analytics. If you're not curious about what's going on, maybe you can care less about the analytics and getting those insights from that data. So yeah, very interesting perspective you had there.
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I would echo that point entirely. I think it's when we think about the data that we're generating and the work we're doing, people often talk about kind of research grade data, regulatory grade data. But to that point about what are people doing with it, how are people using it, it becomes very pertinent when we're talking about regulatory grade data. What are governments doing with it? What are healthcare agencies doing with the data? I think when we think about it, we understand that it all starts with quality. You have to ensure, as with all the speakers today, the data we're generating is a highest quality available. But then beyond that, I think it's exactly right. We're in such early stages of those discussions about ensuring people trust the data, can rely on the data, and then how is it going to be used? We know that data is critical to clinicians, to patients, but at that higher level, how are institutions using it? How are governments? How are regulators using it? And that's still an open question. Those are ongoing discussions in the UK, in Canada, and in the US.
Yeah, and I'd like to kind of agree with all that. And it's important to remember that not all data are alike. There's very varying quality in data. And the big risk with this whole thing is that if you use poor quality data, there's a ruder way to say it, but poor quality in, poor quality out. But there's a very big danger that poor quality data and bad assumptions are hidden within models. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you base some sort of decision-making, algorithm on poor quality data that have some bad assumptions, people would just treat it as a black box and just accept what comes out of it. And I think this idea of transparency and accountability of what goes on within machine learning models and use of data like that is incredibly important for both good outcomes and also for confidence.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there's massive challenges, not in acquiring the data, but in actually getting the consent to even do what we think we need to. So when I look at the legal and regulatory regime that surrounds a patient's data, understanding what's going to be involved in terms of consent to use the data and the liabilities that result from automated decision making. I think we've got a ways to go before we can put our arms around that even mentally. In the past 2 weeks or 3 weeks maybe, there's a new bill that's been introduced in Canada around consumer privacy. And it's not legislation yet, but it actually addresses artificial intelligence as a statute within that bill. And it's interesting because we're trying to grapple with the regulatory side of it while we're gathering all this data. In our group, in our system, we've got about 4.5 million pieces of data that we haven't grappled with, that we're not sure how to use, because we're looking for, we want to make sure that as a private company, we're holding ourselves, and I'm sure the other guys on this call are in the same position. As a private company, we want to make sure that we're holding ourselves to a higher standard of data governance and data usage, because that's it's a death sentence if we do that wrong.
I mean, notwithstanding the liability of all of us in interacting with data, privacy doesn't exist. Google and Apple know absolutely everything you're doing. Google can do a trial of 1 million people in an hour. Now, not a clinical trial, but a trial to find out behavior. And to the point about the quality of data, I live in the world of really high quality data, clinical data. However, I've heard recently from some of my customers, they like dumb data too. Where do you buy your milk? That's important to the drug company as much as the statistically significant piece of data about cognition. So, to my earlier point, boy, it's still a clean sheet of paper out there as to how we manage data.
So do you guys have any evidence on the economic value of the data to us as patients, to clinicians, to the payers? In Canada, we have, the provinces and territories are our major payer, about 70%. Then there's the private insurance that most of us have, and then the rest is out of pocket. So there are really, in a sense, 3 payers. How do we leverage that and generate the economic value to the healthcare system and kind of bend that cost curve or increase the outcome curve so we get more value? Any evidence there on the economic value of that data system broadly?
Well, just from my perspective, we've got a bunch of companies here in front of you that are looking at the diagnostics and early detection. And if we want to talk about economic value, we look to the cost of not detecting early and not being able to assess that. And it's a massive, massive number. And I think, it came up in previous discussions about how many trillions of dollars could be saved with the proper assessment early on. I think the easiest economic discussion to have is how much will early detection save our health system?
Yeah. I mean, I heard my PI the other day talking about there will never be a cure for Parkinson's or Alzheimer's until we have early detection. Because the people coming into the trials are 17 years into the disease with a dopaminergic decline that even the most effective compound has no impact. So that's cost on one side. The other part of the equation is I believe that the patient should own their data. And there are companies out there like Humanity who are beginning to help the patient monetize the data, say, okay, you know what, Google, you want my data? You got to pay me a royalty. You know, IBM, you want my data? You got to pay me. You know, that sounds kind of crazy, but I don't think we're very far away from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great lead into another aspect around liberating that data for not only clinician use, which is improved a lot. I was at the interoperability and standards file as well for Canada for 10 years. But for consumers, legislation already exists in the US. It became effective in March with respect to giving patients more access to their own data so they could use it in their favorite apps, for example. Ontario tabled some legislation of the same ilk, but the regulations haven't been written yet. So there is a movement, I think, worldwide on creating more data for patients. So what are your perspectives on that? There's opportunities for you as vendors. There's threats, maybe risks around privacy. So what do you see as kind of the opportunities, threats, and risks with respect to that movement that's happened worldwide?
And maybe I could jump, get started. I think there is movement. It's glacial. I think I would echo the sentiment. And our position is we don't own data. We don't retain rights to data. We want to get data into the hands of people that need it most. And I think for too long we forget about the patients. As you say, people are starting to acknowledge slowly that patients are quite important participants in their own care, or at least they should be. And so absolutely, our approach is getting the right data into their hands is going to be key to understanding disease diagnosis, treatments, outcomes. Only in the last 10 years that we've been starting to think about patient-reported outcomes, things that are meaningful to them, rather than just things that are meaningful to us in a lab or kind of us on paper. And so I see this as a real opportunity, both for Pentavere, but actually, having listened to the talks for all the organizations represented here, patients are a key, should be the central pillar for everything we're doing. And so, it's going to be key to moving forward as we're thinking about what to do with data.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important that the data are used to directly benefit the patient. That's the thing, it's exactly to your point, that often within healthcare, you look at things from your side of the table, but it's very important that people benefit from their own, incredibly valuable resource of their data. It's incredibly true. And I think also to the earlier point, that if you are, as a company, able to stay ahead of these trends and to make sure that you exceed the expectations at all times, then that actually becomes a competitive advantage. And it's certainly a risk reduction in terms of things that can damage your, your ability to do business.
Yeah, Chris, you brought up an interesting term there, data ownership. I've had a lot of conversations about that with multiple stakeholders. Vendors think they own the data, or some vendors do. My view, they're the collection and storage mechanisms for it. Health systems will say they own the data. Sometimes clinicians will say they own the data. In reality, the Supreme Court in Canada has weighed in on this, and I've heard courts in the US have as well. I just don't have the direct link to the evidence. But the Supreme Court in Canada has ruled we as persons own our own data. And the way I like to think of it, we own our data. Maybe my doctor owns the file, which is holding my data, because they're accountable to keep that file, keep that record, and be a custodian of that file. But data ownership is very often misunderstood concept, at least in Canada and the US.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's going to be very interesting, Dennis, is that as we start to look into consent to use the data, that's not an easy task. Right?
No.
To be able to say, patient, sign here because we're going to use your data. For all sorts
how many people read those consents?
Yeah.
You show up, yeah.
I can tell you, the lawyer in me says those consents are going to be under attack for companies like all of ours.
Yeah.
There has to be value. I think there has to be value. Patients, there's all kinds of data on, patients willingly participate in research because they think they're either bettering themselves, their family members, or society. If you cannot convince someone that there's value in the data you're asking me to share, then they're going to balk. And I would argue that the EU and UK are even, farther ahead on protecting patients than we are.
Yeah, and then the risk to data and data use is even becoming exacerbated by our genetic fingerprint and how it might be used by non-healthcare entities like insurance, for example. Might it affect my insurability? Barrington, I guess we're getting close to the end of our...
Yeah,
right?
I was just going to say we have a minute left, so just letting you know.
Yeah, I mean, I just maybe to kind of give you a bit of perspective and to summarize, I think the insights our four presenters shared today were excellent. I've been working in the healthcare space for 20 years, and when I got into it 20 years ago, I couldn't believe how much of a laggard it was with respect to digital health and the like. I think we're growing that digital footprint exponentially. I think we've clearly, probably 10 years ago, reached the tipping point or critical mass of people, clinicians, doctors in particular, and health systems like hospitals and clinics having electronic health records. And I think, the four of you exhibit how that can be used to not only better outcomes, but maybe reduce costs and getting those better outcomes and generating a sustainable healthcare system. So I applaud all four of you for what you're doing as both a patient as well as a payer into those pots of money that are paying for that healthcare. So thank you very much for your time.
Be sure to give COVID its due. We wouldn't be where we are today without COVID. There's changed.
Yeah,
what no regulatory body could do, COVID did.
Yeah, and my wife said
Brightsquid. May you all have continued success in expanding your business. Thank you to our attendees for your time today. Go to the company's website. Do your due diligence. Learn more about these companies.